A very, very warm welcome to our Mind and Life Europe Association members, and particularly to our Mind and Life Europe friends. My name is Cornelius Pietzner, and I'm Managing Director of Mind and Life Europe, and I will be your moderator for this evening's session. The Mind and Life Europe Friends, it's an initiative we launched just about a week ago for those seeking a forum to connect more consistently with Mind and Life Europe. And we're very pleased indeed that you have become a Mind and Life Europe friend, and we look forward to welcoming many others as well in the future. We have several fascinating webinars planned for Mind and Life Europe friends in the coming weeks and months that will include preeminent researchers, scientists, and contemplatives closely connected with Mind and Life Europe. And we're delighted that you have joined us for this evening's webinar. In regard to the format, our featured presenter will speak for about 25 or 30 minutes. And immediately following this, we will put a very brief questionnaire on the screen with 3 simple questions, which we hope will help us serve you better in the future. And we hope that you will take those 2 or 3 minutes and fill the questionnaire out. And we also hope that technology works so that you will be able to do that. Shouldn't take more than 2 minutes, 3 minutes maximum. It's really quite simple. Thank you very much already in advance for that. And immediately following, we will proceed to your questions and the responses from Dr. Antoine Lutz. Maybe a practical matter for this webinar, please use the chat function on your screen to type your questions, and I'll do my best to sort them out and to present them to our speaker. We'll also be listing an email address that you can use for any questions that you have that we didn't have time to answer, and also general questions. And in fact, it's an email that you can use if you have specific questions later on that you wish to address to Antoine Lutz, and we will forward them to him. We would also invite you, of course, to visit again and again our Mind and Life Europe Friends webpage, which is on our main webpage, where we will announce the programs that we have coming up in the next weeks and months. All the information will be announced there, and it'll be updated regularly. We will conclude the seminar, as we promised, promptly in 1 hour at 7 p.m. It might also interest you to know that we have registrations for this seminar, for this webinar, from 10 different countries, mostly from Europe, of course, but also including the United States. Welcome to all of you. So the topic of our webinar this evening is meditation and pain from the lenses of phenomenology and neurosciences. And it's my great pleasure to introduce and welcome Antoine Lutz as our Mind and Life Europe Friends' first webinar presenter. Antoine Lutz is a research director at INSERM in the Lyon Neuroscience Research Center, CNRL. He did his PhD in cognitive neurosciences in Paris with Francisco Varela, and during his postdoctoral work with Richard Davidson at the University of Madison, Wisconsin, he pioneered the neuroimaging study of meditation. In 2008, Davidson and him were awarded an NIH NCCAM grant to fund the first American Center of Excellence on research dedicated to the neurophysiological study of meditation. At the CRNL since 2013, Antoine Lutz's research group focuses on investigating the neurophysiological basis of mindfulness and compassion meditations and their impact on consciousness, attention, and emotion regulations and pain perception as measured by cognitive, affective, and social neuroimaging paradigms. We look greatly forward to hear what Antoine Lutz will share with us, some very fresh research, we've been told, and thank you, Antoine, for being willing to be the first webinar presenter in our Mind and Life Europe Friends series. So with this, let me welcome you, Antoine, and turn the screen over to you.
Good evening, everyone. Let me try to start my session. Here we go. Can you see my slide? Cornelius, maybe? Can you confirm
Yes,
that?
I can see it. I
Right.
can see it with Mingyur Rinpoche.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
Well, welcome everyone. I'm very excited to be here tonight to discuss some very new finding that we have in our lab. So I thought it would be more fun to discuss really novel data. Some of them are not published yet, so but they're really exciting, and it's actually the focus of the topic of a PhD thesis of Yele Zon, which is going to finish it in a couple of weeks, and it's a study funded by Europe, the ERC, part of a grant that I got in 2014 to investigate the mechanism and the neuroplasticity induced by mindfulness meditation. And so in this project, Yele I've done all the work. Stefano is a very talented postdoc who is doing qualitative research, and I will present some of it at the end. And Usama Abdul is a postdoc as well, who helped in some of the data analysis. So, so the focus today is on pain, and through the year I really started to be really interested by the opportunity to study scientifically pain. And in brief, because we know a lot scientifically about pain, but also it is a very interesting model to investigate consciousness, and in particular also meditation. So I start to really appreciate it as a model. And so scientifically, as you all know, pain can be characterized as a very complex phenomena, which is characterized by an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience that can be described in terms of tissue damage. And what is special about pain is that it is not only something sensorial, but it has also a very strong affective component. It's definitely something subjective, and it can be modulated by many belief and expectation, hope and fear, and it has also a component, a motor component. So the primary question for tonight, that was also a topic of Yele's thesis, is to try to understand a very old questions, which is actually called sometimes the question of the second arrow of pain. So that's a quote from a sutta from the Pali, the Salata Sutta, so more than 2,000 years old, but it's very modern in a way. So what it says, when an ordinary and educated person, meaning someone who is not a meditator, is affected by a sensation of pain, he laments, complains, and grieves, hits his chest, and becomes anxious. As a result, they feel two kinds of pain, a physical and a mental. Just as if one were to shoot an arrow at a man and just afterwards shoot another, so that he will feel the pain of two arrows. So I really like this quotation because it's really characterized very precisely where meditation can really primarily act, and it's really mostly acting on the second arrow of pain as a regulation of some of the cognitive and affective amplification of the sensory experience of pain. So in modern time, it's surprising to find a very similar construct in clinical psychology. And that's the notion of pain catastrophizing. So pain catastrophizing is used in psychology to describe the tendency that we have to describe a pain experience in a very magnified term, more than an average person. and also to ruminate the pain, and also to feel helpless in relation to that experience of pain. So in this study, we're going to use a pain catastrophizing scale, and I thought it would be useful to highlight some of this, to give you some example of item that we asked the participants in our study. So to measure the exaggeration or magnification of pain, you can ask questions like, I become afraid that the pain may get worse, or I wonder whether something serious may happen. There is also a question related to rumination. I anxiously want the pain to go away, or I can't seem to keep it out of my mind. And then the third dimension is about helplessness. I worry all the time about whether the pain will end. There is nothing I can do to reduce the intensity of the pain. So what is very striking with this description is that it's almost mapping perfectly with the previous sutta that we described before. So as a very simple question, you could ask yourself, if you're going to give this pain catastrophizing scale to a group of expert practitioners who have meditated for many years versus novices, are you going to expect that they're going to differ? So we've done that. So in this study, we had the chance to recruit a very, very long expert practitioner in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. We had a chance to have Mathieu or Ricard helping us to recruit long-term practitioners in his center and across all Europe. And so we managed to collect about 30 of them. And that took us about 2 years. So it's a very long process because they're hard to find. So it's very rare data. And also all of them practice at least more than 10,000 hours in a life. So when they came to the lab, they fill a lot of questionnaires, including this one. And what you can see without surprise that they clearly differ compared to novices who have never meditated. They're much lower on these scales. So that's very exciting because we know that they're going to be a good population to, I mean, it's nothing surprising, but it's a good things to confirm that they are probably managing pain differently. So in clinical psychology, the construct of pain catastrophizing is very important, and it has been used a lot in many models that try to account for chronic pain. And I don't have time here to go into the detail of this type of models, but there are a lot of evidence that if we try to understand what are the mechanisms or causes of chronic pain, one of the most strongest risk factor or vulnerability factor of chronic pain is pain catastrophizing. Now, as you probably know, chronic pain is highly prevalent in our society. More than 20% of adults in Europe are affected by moderate to severe chronic pain. It has a huge financial burden. So for instance, in the US, it's several hundred billions a year that are caused by chronic pain. And also chronic pain is comorbid with many mental health conditions, depression, anxiety, and also physiological one, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, osteoporosis, cardiopulmonary. And as you know, it's difficult to treat chronic pain, and there are a lot of secondary negative effects to painkillers. So it's really an important societal questions. And there are different techniques to different psychotherapeutical approach to cope with chronic pain. And mindfulness-based intervention has been used for now almost two or three decades to explore the relationship of the impact of mindfulness on pain. Actually, the first study of John Kabat-Zinn, his first program was on a patient with chronic pain. Now, if you look at the recent meta-analysis, you can see that there are still, after like 30 years of clinical research, relatively weak data supporting the fact that there is an effect of mindfulness-based intervention on pain itself, but there are pretty good and reliable evidence showing that it's particularly good at the affective response to pain, in particular in relation to depression and quality of life. So in my lab, in my group, where we are not so much interested by clinical work, we're really more doing what's called fundamental research. So we are interested by mechanism. And so what we really try to do is to understand the cognitive mechanism of meditation and how it can really regulate pain. And I don't have a lot of time, so I can be very brief. Just to say that mindfulness meditation, it's a broad term. That's there are many styles of mindfulness meditation. Sometimes a very synthetic definition is to say that it's cultivate a form of non-elaborative, non-judgmental, present-centered awareness. So in this context, you can see that it's contradictory to pain catastrophizing. A mindfulness stance is thought to deflate the negative cognitive affective elaboration of pain. So it's really targeting at the second hour of pain. And how does it work? It's by becoming aware of distracting thoughts and automatic emotional reactivity. So that the first point. So the first core mechanism is what you could say a form of metacognitive monitoring. So it's capacity of knowing your own mind, taking some distance with your not getting absorbed. And the second important one is to observe them as mere mental event. So there are many ways to understand that, but you can think about maybe a form of letting go, or just recognizing the nature of pain. Now, how did we try to get at this mechanism? So again, I'm going to focus on one of them, which is the notion of cognitive diffusion. In brief, I think there are accumulative evidence that's one of the most, that this construct is particularly important for understanding the clinical effect of mindfulness. And to explain very briefly, I think I'm going to do a little exercise, and it's going to be interesting to see if I can do it through webinar. So it's a webinar-based experiential exercise. So I ask you to look at this strawberry and just get totally absorbed by it, and try to make it very, very appear as real in front of you, as existing as in flesh, as if it was real. So try to do it for a couple of seconds. You can imagine you're going to maybe grab it and eat it. So I don't have time to interact with you, but we can see during the questions that maybe some of you have experienced, for instance, a feeling of salivation, and associated to that, and that's what's really described the capacity of the capacity of the mind to make a mental event appear as solid and real, and that's really what is characterized by this notion of cognitive diffusion. Cognitive diffusion is a capacity to recognize that the strawberry mental image that you had before is just a mental image. Even if it's produced a physiological response in you, which is salivation, it is just mental. And that's actually at the heart of mindfulness meditation. In the context of pain, it would mean that you are capable to recognize that when you have a physical pain, that all the imagery, the emotions, the thoughts that are associated to it, you can not only observe them at distance, but also recognize that they are just mental. They're just, and as such, you can, for instance, recognize that they appear are lasting forever, but when you observe them, you can see that actually they are much more labile, much more dynamic. And so you can diffuse that physical pain. So we're going to use a scale that has been developed, a psychometric scale that is used to characterize that. It's called a Drexel diffusion scale. And without too much surprise, when you do the same thing, you give this type of scales to experts and you ask them to rank how they perceive, whether they can diffuse emotion, diffuse pain, diffuse anger. You can see that they report being much better at that than novices. Now, what we try to test in this study is to see how mindfulness meditation can regulate pain, but by precisely uncoupling the sensory aspect of pain from the affective evaluative pain aspect. So somehow the idea that when you are monitoring your pain and you can somehow then regulate all the second arrow of pain by just monitoring it as mental. And so the hypothesis that cognitive diffusion was the primary construct to account for the regulation of pain catastrophizing. Now, how can we try to do that with normal person in the lab? So we developed a novel experiment that was try to amplify the cognitive affective aspect of pain. So somehow we try to manipulate this second arrow of pain. How did we do that? First, by working on anticipation. We know that if you tell to someone that something bad will happen to them, they're going to start to feel anxious. So that's one mechanism. And the second one is by playing with the duration of the pain. One pain was so it was some thermal pain that you put on the wrist. It's actually quite painful. It can't hurt you, but it's very unpleasant. And either you had a very short one, only like 8 seconds, or a very long one. And we thought that when you have a very long one, that's the one who trigger a lot of thoughts, resistance, elaboration, and so on. And that was a way to manipulate experimentally the second arrow of pain. And we thought that your propensity to catastrophize pain will be reflected by a difference rating in your experience on pain, in particular on scale that measure only the intensity of pain or the affective response, how much it bothers you. And so we predict that the two groups will not differ on intensity, but specifically on unpleasantness. And we also wanted to see how the state of mindfulness was helping in this process. So we had one state of what we call open monitoring, which was a form of mindfulness, and then a control condition when they were asked to count numbers, and that was more an avoidance condition. Voila. And so novices were trained for doing a weekend to learn to meditate, and so they were able to practice some form of mindfulness. So time is running, so I'm going to be brief, but the bottom line is that we replicate several studies that show that indeed there was a difference, that mindfulness in general, the state of mindfulness compared to a state of avoidance or counting, is characterized by a sensory uncoupling, by a reduction of specifically of the unpleasantness scale, but not the intensity. So you perceive the same level of intensity, but it bothers you less to simply monitor in a detached way your mental experience. That was the first finding, and we found that across novice and experts. But what was very exciting is that in general, experts, which are in red, and novice, which are in blue on the screen, experts, as we found in other studies, are much better at reducing the affective response to pain. And what is particularly true is that they are particularly better at it in the long trials. That's where we really see a differentiation between long and between novice and experts. And what was very exciting is that when we then split the two groups based on their score on the pain catastrophizing scales. So we separate the group with a high pain catastrophizing versus low pain catastrophizing. What you can see on the graph is that people who are a tendency to worry and to amplify and catastrophize pain are the ones that can't really separate or distinguish in their experience the sensory aspect from the affective one. And they're also the one who report the highest unpleasantness. And among them, you see the dot in red are the expert and the dot in blue are the novices. And in general, the novice, as I showed before, were much higher on pain catastrophizing compared to the experts. And the more you were in the more you were in low in pain catastrophizing, the more you were able to separate the affective and sensory response of pain. So that suggests that there is a relationship between this scale of pain catastrophizing and the way you regulate pain. So in general, we did not find a lot of, we find a general effect of regulation of mindfulness, but initially we did not find a difference of a better, experts were not better initially in mindfulness on their scale compared to the novices. And when we try to understand why it was like that, we test the hypothesis that it was actually maybe a result of the style of practice that they're doing. So if you want, I can discuss that more in the question, but it's I think a very important finding. It's essentially showing that experts, when they do mindfulness or open presence meditation, they are better at doing this uncoupling, but it has an effect. It has an effect on the next state. So if essentially if they start to do the distracting task, and then they do the meditation task, then in that case we see a difference between the distraction and the mindfulness. But when they were doing first, in the first block, the mindfulness and then the distraction, we found that the distraction looked actually more in their response were comparable or identical to the mindfulness condition. And I was very excited to find that we found that because it suggests that there is this kind of a lingering effect for experts, that when they start to meditate on mindfulness or open presence, then it's color all the experience, and then it's very hard not to do it when they're asked to do a distraction task. So that was an interesting observation, and we can discuss that later if you want. And very quickly, I think I need to go. We also found that the scale of Drexel diffusion scale, so the level, the degree of cognitive diffusion was a predictor of your capacity to uncouple and regulate pain. So for us, it's very important because it's what we found in a way. It's the first time there is a bridge between a very classical mainstream construct in clinical psychology, which is pain catastrophizing, that is used all over the place, and something that is coming from the contemplative tradition, which is this notion of cognitive diffusion. And we can really find that they are working in an opposite way. And the more people have a tendency to worry or exaggerate, the less they have this capacity to distance themselves with the mind and take it as just mental. So I think it's a very important clinical finding. And so Yele is trying to finish the analysis of the MRI. So it's not published yet, but I'm just going to very briefly describe some of the findings. So here I'm only going to report the anticipation aspect. So as you remember, we play with a degree of anticipation as one mechanism by which you can manipulate the manipulate how it's the amplification by the second hour of pain of the experience of pain. And as predicted, we found that novices had a stronger activation in their brain during anticipation when they knew it will be a hot one compared to novice in a region that is called the anterior insula. So the anterior insula is a very particular brain region that is involved in affects, and it's really it's played a key role in the experience or the subjective experience of emotions, and we believe in science, and the scientists believe that it's really a core region involved in the anticipation or the projection of the anticipation of an affective state. So that's somehow a simulation of how of a future affective states. And you can see that, for instance, patients which are more anxious have a tendency to overactivate the anterior insula during anticipation. And so it's not surprising that we found that expert has less anticipation in this anterior insula compared to novices. That was really a core region of interest for us. What we also found is that the two groups differ in relation to some frontal region, suggesting that which are involved in a regulation, kind of cognitive regulation region, and again that this idea that there is maybe more a need for regulate emotions for novices doing anticipation when they're facing with the painful simulation. And finally, if you see on the graph at the bottom, what we found is that when we try to understand whether this brain pattern in anticipation, we ask ourselves whether that will be a predictor of the pain, the sensory, the affective sensory uncoupling of pain during pain. In our model, there is this amplification by, if you're worried, it's gonna amplify then the actual physical experience of pain. So we test whether the brain region, the anterior insula, during anticipation was predicting how much people were reporting and being able to reduce, to decouple the intensity from the affective one. And we found indeed that there was this a correlation between the two. And when we look in the brain, which part of the brain were predicting the sensory uncoupling, we found again another region of the insula, which is much more posterior, which is the posterior part of the insula. And this part is really involved in the actual sensory aspect of it. And so one interpretation is that the more people are simulating and actually feeling the future pain during anticipation, the less they are able during the actual pain to disentangle the sensory response for the affective response. So in a way, there is a fusion or confusion between the sensory and the affective one, and it's perceived as being more unpleasant. So that's kind of the core messages that I wanted to present you today. And there is a work in progress. I just mentioning maybe for the questions that we also did some first-person interview after the task, and we asked the experts and the novices for doing this 1 hour interview, 30 minutes to 1 hour interview, many questions about their worldview, their metaphysics, and also how they perceive and regulate suffering in general and pain, and how meditation can help them. And then Stefano managed to analyze all this interview with some qualitative techniques and identify 5 clusters of style of coping with pain. And what was very interesting is that I don't have time to go into detail, but some style is really about suppressing pain. Some style is more about taking control of pain, more like a soldier or a sports, really about controlling pain. And then there is some clusters which are much more related to for experts, which are about really changing the relationship to pain and not first recognizing the pain as a mental event and somehow deconstructing this response into as opportunity to gain insight about the mental life, and also as an opportunity to practice compassion. And what you see, this weird graph that you see here, is actually what's happened when you try to explain the different scale that I presented before as a function of these 5 clusters. And you can find that these 5 clusters can predict different profile, different fingerprint in the way people are answering the different scales and measure during the pain task. So that really suggests that there is a different, also a much more complex and a much more rich story that we could tell about this data set if we try to understand also the narrative that is around pain for the novice and the expert practitioners. So I'm going to stop, and I'm going to let Cornelius lead the Q&A. Thank you.
Antoine, thank you so much. I realized when you were going through your presentation that it's absolutely unfair, not fair at all, to ask you to present so much interesting data just in 30 minutes. So apologies on the one hand, and thank you on the other for nevertheless doing that. Now, so stay with us, Antoine, because we do have a couple of questions. But before we go into the questions, we did promise you or threaten you with a really short questionnaire. And maybe we could bring that up. It'll just take 2 minutes, and we'll go through it quickly. You can complete it online on your computer, on the screen. And it's just 3 questions. You see, I hope you can see it there. And you can just, the first one is, which of the following best represents your affiliation with Mind and Life Europe? There are 4 answers. You can just click on the button. And then the second one is, what age group are you in? That shouldn't take, hopefully, too long to answer. And then, so you can just, click on it, and it should be then filled out. And I will do that as well. And then you can scroll down, and you will see the third question is, which country are you based in? And then you just click the submit button, and off it goes. So I hope that you've been able to do that. Three questions, click, 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 submit. Thank you. Good. So now we have some minutes to address some questions. I know I have a few, but there are a few here that are listed, and Antoine, I'll just kind of share them with you. We may not have time for all of them, but we'll certainly try to get to as many as we can. Yes.
Maybe we don't have a lot of time, and I think it would be nice maybe if the broadband allow for that people can also switch on the camera, so we know see each other. So
well, yeah, the way it's structured at this point, I'm just gonna read the questions because they're coming in the chat room.
All right.
Otherwise, absolutely, then that would have been good. But we just kind of arranged this format, so bear with me. I do understand that would have been nice in that way. But there's one question. Was there a gender difference, in terms of the results of your study between male and female?
No. Well, in the test, we have not formally tested that as an hypothesis, and I think it's the short answer is no.
Okay. Okay. I'm just going to go right through the questions because there are a number of them, and I'm going to jump around a little bit so we get different people contributing. How did you control other attributes, in structuring the study apart from meditation expertise that might have contributed to the results or to the effect?
Well, we match for gender, for age. Thanks for the question. You don't have time to go in there, but we tried also to match them in terms of the pain threshold, for instance, so they perceive the same. So everyone has so we have different pain tolerance and different pain threshold, and we control that the two groups did not differ on that. And so they're not differ in gender, they're not differ in, I want to say education, but I need to check that point. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But so this type of study it's very hard to, you do your best to match the group, but as a cross-sectional study, it's very hard to, it's one of the main limitations of this type of study. Because there are people who go on a 3-year retreat, they're likely to be different on some levels. And so it's one of the main limitations of this type of study, but at the same time, it's hard to do randomized clinical trials with an intervention of 3 years in silence. So,
then I'm jumping again. What kind of meditation do you actually test? Was it Vipassana or only, or were there other kinds that you were, in terms of your?
Yes, thank you for the question. I went quickly through that. So it's a difficult question. In a nutshell, for the expert, it's quite simple. We really try to get at a style of mindfulness that is in the Tibetan tradition. We call it open presence, or it's more like what's called nature of mind meditation, or some scholars conceptualize it as non-dual mindfulness. So it's a form of it's a style of practice that you do in Mahamudra and Dzogchen, and it's very hard to control for that to get the same equivalent for novices, but for novices, we did a style which is you could call open monitoring or choiceless awareness. But they were trained in 2 steps. First, they're trained into mindfulness on an object, and then they do more like a open monitoring or choiceless awareness style, and that's what they were asked to do. Mm-hmm. So it was more in the conceptualized in the context of Tibetan Buddhism.
Mm-hmm. But do you think that different meditations or meditation trainings might have had different results in terms of compassion, self-compassion?
So. Yeah, I didn't have time to do a proper formal review of the field, but there are actually, it's debated. I think that there have been different study on meditation and pain, and with different style and different level of expertise. And it makes the whole study quite difficult to review, actually, because I think some style of meditation are much more about controlling attention, so a form of concentrative practice, and that's actually quite different from the style of meditation we're doing here, which is more about a form of letting go, of openness of experience, or non-judgment, and non-reactivity. So it's quite different, and there are some indication in the field that probably have a different mechanism and different effect on pain.
Thank you. Thank you, Antoine. Okay, here's another question of a different sort. Fear responses should be evident in other brain regions, for example, the amygdala. Do you find any evidence for differences between experts and novices?
It's a great question. I also predict that, and so far we have not. We test that with an a priori region, and it was not in the anticipation. We found it before in another study that I did in Madison with Richard Davidson, on experts, and there was really a group differences in amygdala, so it will be logical to find it. So there are different possibility. One is that amygdala is really in anticipation respond a lot to uncertainty. In this case, there was a participant knew that they were receiving an unpleasant stimulus for sure, and so there was no uncertainty. And so maybe if you really want to manipulate anticipatory anxiety, the best way to do it is introduce to optimize the uncertainty. And in that case, we did not do it just for practical reason, because that would have been, the design would have been too complicated. So in a way, participant knew 100% that they will get hit when it was a region hit. And maybe that's explain why there is less amygdala activation. In medicine, it was totally uncertain. Another interpretation is that we're using a new sequence. It's called multiband, and I don't have time to go into detail, but we're hoping to look at chronometry of the insula, and so it's a great sequence, but it's very fast, and it's probably pick up a lot on physical noise, and so we developed some techniques to reduce that noise, but it might be that it contaminates some of this effect. We don't know.
Do you think that meditation affects recovery from a painful experience?
Yeah, so we have not finalized analysis here, but that's indeed our prediction. In Madison, I've done another study, and we look at the recovery from pain with expert practitioners, and indeed there were the chronometry of the anterior insula was different in terms of the recovery, and also the way the experts were habituating to pain was different. So I think we predict indeed that there will be a difference in chronometry in a recovery, and we think that during the long one, our hypothesis that we're currently testing is that during the long stimuli for the expert in particular, you will see gradually a decrease of this of the affective response in the brain, and you might not see the same modulation for novices, and we think that's really that's what we try to test, and that would be a way that would be a good candidate to be a neural correlate of this sensory affective uncoupling that we found behaviorally.
Okay, another question. We have about 10 more minutes.
Okay.
So you found a difference between expert and novices in perceived intensity. Did you test the subjects in relation to the Weber-Fechner law? And could you explain the Weber-Fechner law in 1 minute or less?
We did not find well, let me double check, because there is it's hold on. Yeah, I'm quite confident we did not find a difference in intensity. Didn't say that. We find a difference of expertise in unpleasantness, not in intensity. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of that's our prediction, that they don't differ so much in the intensity itself, but in the affective one. And now in terms of I was just checking my notes because it's a little bit more complicated when we compare the short and the long one. And but in a nutshell, that's kind of the story. There is no difference in intensity, but it's really the affective one. Mm-hmm. And so for the low, I'm not Not sure exactly which one you, yeah, maybe this person is,
Well, okay, if it's, I think that if it's, you know, since we're running out of time, maybe we'll defer that particular element, or we can put it on email and send it to you later on. I think that would be the best way to deal with this. Okay, so maybe two more questions or so.
okay.
Do you have examples, Antoine, where people practicing mindfulness increase their depression or burnout instead of decreasing it due to the distancing with the mental pain that may link to unacceptable things, if I understood this question correctly?
Yeah. Okay, so there is some evidence that sometimes when people start to meditate, there is they can have an increased feeling of unpleasant emotions. And that, I think that being clinically reported. There's, so I'm not sure whether the person is referring to adverse events in meditation. So that's a different field of research. There are some evidence sometimes that some meditator can have very strong negative experience during meditation. It has been documented. But to speak more generally, I think the idea that for some novices, when they start to meditate, they will experience more emotions, and I think for me that reflects the increase in meta awareness. So they're more aware of thoughts and emotions. So maybe that could increase a sense of anxiety, and that's why the second mechanism is very important. Is this recognition that that the mental is just mental. So that's kind of the core mechanism to deflate and to let go, or to diffuse, to suspend the mental event, emotion or thoughts. So if you do it right, that's kind of the mechanism in mindfulness. But it's true that some novices can see initially more emotions, and that can be distressful sometimes.
So Antoine, at towards the beginning of your presentation, you indicated a really large societal problem, which is chronic pain. And you indicated that 20% of adults in Europe suffer from chronic pain with a huge economic, not to mention psychological burden, sometimes lasting weeks, months, and even years. You know, with a detrimental effect on productivity and, you know, quality of life issues and so on and so forth. So that's almost like a premise or justification for perhaps the kind of research that you're doing. And you have interesting results, and some are very, very fresh. In an ideal situation, what happens with the kind of research that you're doing so that it can flow back into society? For example, you know, is it taken up by insurance companies or by hospitals? Where would you ideally see, you know, taking the work, the research that you're doing, and it kind of embedding itself or having an impact in addressing some of these substantial societal issues?
Well, I think I have to say, I mean, the type of study we're doing, the contribution is quite modest. It's more, if anything, it's more motivational in a way, because we have not demonstrated, because it's a cross-sectional study, that this effect are directly produced by meditation. It's more like we need to do to demonstrate it. We need to do a clear longitudinal design, but what we really doing here is to developing concept markers, and also, so meaning we try to identify the mechanism with very refined paradigms, And that's provide tools then for clinicians to maybe know exactly where to look at and what to train to see the effect of experts. So in a way, it's more, we are more in providing the tools, and hopefully then these type of tools can be, or this type of hypotheses and tools can be used then by in longitudinal design to test that it works. And I think there will be at least 2 more steps to do. First, that you demonstrate that you find the same thing with a longitudinal design with novice, like with a safe, healthy person. And we're going to do a study like that this fall. But then you need to apply also with patients and try to replicate that with patients. So it's a really a long process. And often it's one obstacle that I see, that all our clinical work is really based on a very short intervention. And we still don't know also in our field what the necessary dose to really say an effect of meditation. So as I show in this meta-analysis, it's quite sobering. There is a small effect on pain, but it's not super strong. And there's an effect, a clear effect, well, on depression and also quality of life. But the effect on pain itself, compared to what we found, is quite small. So it suggests that maybe there is still work to do to really understand the dose of meditation that you need to do to really see an impact. So I think what we're doing is our contribution, to be specific, is that we use a very clear construct of pain catastrophizing, and which speaks a lot to clinicians. And we found that actually it's modulated by a very clear construct, which is a very clear cognitive mechanism. And I think my hope is that it's going to really trigger the curiosity of clinicians, which are in a different galaxy of research, and they're going to be interested by this type of finding, and they will want to test it on patients. That's how it works.
Antoine, thank you. And on behalf of Mind and Life Europe, I also want to thank you for being willing to, on relatively short term, for having such a busy schedule, to give us a good hour of your time so we could kick off our webinar series. It's 7 p.m. We did say we would close. A really warm thank you. It's super exciting what you're doing and giving us a glimpse into your research. We're going to put up a slide now, in parting, and for some upcoming events that we can already mention. As you can see there, please put in your calendars if you would like. On June 20th, we'll have our second webinar on the mindful brain with Elena Antonova. And on July 8th, The Power of Compassion, our third webinar with Tanya Singer. We have a few more in the works, also with the Contemplative that will follow. And thank you so much, all of the participants, attendees, for joining us for this hour. And once again, Antoine, thank you, and wish you all a good evening.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.